So, before we even start, I just have to ask you this one question because I've been wondering this for a while. But do you have a favorite species of shark?
A favorite?
Species of shark. Like great white, tiger.
Land shark?
Okay, good answer. But you have a favorite type of seaweed, though, I bet.
A favorite?
Type of seaweed.
Oh, kelp. Kelp needs help. So here we are.
Amazing. So you're a renowned, respected academic. I'm a high school dropout. You are an environmentalist, the definition of an environmentalist. I was once called a delinquent by a member of Australian government. We are very different people, but we're both fighting for the oceans, and we're on the same stage right now. So my first question is there any correct way to be an environmentalist?
To be born. I mean, kids naturally are curious. They want to know everything about everything. And I think kids, when they start out, are not naturally inclined to kill. They learn that. And some of them learn it all too well. But with the right atmosphere of just learning about the world around you, especially if you have a chance as a kid to get acquainted with critters, with a little bit of wilderness, even if it's your backyard. I don't know, you just don't, you want to take care of it. It becomes your home. One issue of our time is not just that we do a really good job of teaching kids the joy of killing, but so many are not given the kind of opportunity that some of us were to get acquainted with the wild, if you will, or to find the wild even in places where there aren't many trees, where you have to look for butterflies and bees and things. So one of the best things that I think needs to be done right now as much as possible is get the kids out in some place where they can be kids, ask questions, get acquainted with earthworms and insects and birds, and find out what lives in the cracks of cement in a sidewalk, what lives in the bark of a tree, and if you're lucky, what lives in a place like this where you might actually see a bit more. And no child left dry is really one of the best recipes for getting from where we are to a better place.
And would you encourage children to follow a path of being an academic, or would you just say to do whatever feels right to them in order to preserve their future and help the natural world?
I think one of the last things I would suggest to a kid is you should be an academic. If your heart leads you in that direction, then by all means, go for it. But on the surface of things, it probably would sound boring. I mean, it isn't, but it could sound that way. So, of course, just to encourage kids, it doesn't matter how old they are. I mean, I think I'm looking at some 30 and 40-year-old kids out here, right? What makes your heart beat fast? What is it that you do really well? What do you love? And if be good at whatever you really love, whatever it is. It might be accounting, for heaven's sakes. It's not what I love, but I have friends who just, they get so excited when they have to do an audit. Wherever your joy is, that's where you should try to be as good as you can at whatever that thing is.
Yeah, and no matter what you do, you can help the ocean. Like, people like myself need people that are accountants to have nonprofits so that we can help, because Lord knows I can't do any of that stuff myself.
No, nobody can do it all, but everybody can certainly do something. And,
Yeah.
and it takes, I mean, saving the ocean is a team sport. And the more diverse the team, the better the chance that you can really secure the kind of difference that is needed.
Love it.
Yeah.
So very often when we talk about the changes in the ocean, we hear a lot of statistics and numbers and scientific evidence. Just before I was here, I actually went to Ecuador for the first time, and I was traveling up and down the coast trying to document evidence of illegal shark fishing. They have some really good laws coming into place to protect sharks there. And the people I was working with, they knew you and they'd taken you diving. And they'd mentioned that you were observing changes in the oceans in Ecuador, that the life you were seeing was different to what you'd seen in the past. And I think it's important for people to understand that we can visually see the impact we're having on the ocean as well after a lifetime of diving.
Well, for most people, even if they've been in, on, around the ocean for decades, if they just stay on the land looking at the ocean, or stay on boats, or dare I say, go surfing, and don't look what's under the board or under the boat, you miss the nature of what's really there, because the ocean from the surface today looks pretty much the way it did 1,000 years ago. But especially since the middle of the 20th century, when I first began taking the plunge, going under the surface, it's truly a different world. I mean, the way the world was in the 1950s as compared to what it is today, it was a different planet, not just in the ocean, but we've seen forests clear cut, they're shrinking. We've seen the decline of birds. We've seen the loss of nature on the terrestrial parts. It's been paralleled, and maybe even more so in some places, under the sea. But who knows? The sharks know. They're witnesses. I'm a witness. I'm not a shark. Well, no matter what some people think. And yeah, sharks are among those creatures. And they're what? How many species of sharks? More than 300? And their history goes back more than 300 million years. And they've been integral to the nature of the ocean. They're part of the great ocean food webs. It starts with light, sunlight, photosynthesis, phytoplankton, capturing carbon and carbon dioxide in the water. Of course, that's where they live. And producing oxygen and forming sugar, food. And it goes from there into the zooplankton, into the little fish, into the bigger fish, and finally something big enough for a shark to notice. The little tiny sharks, they never are really tiny, because baby sharks start out ready to go. You know, unlike, let's say, baby lobsters, when they start out, they have to go through like 16 or 17 different stages in the plankton, eating something different all the way along, until they finally get big enough to drop out of the plankton and settle down like a little lobster this big. It takes a long time. Sharks, I mean, they're get up and go. But it takes a lot of investment through this food chain, even for a little shark. Between the eyes, a little shark. No, big shark. And they can live for such a long time. I mean, the vertebrate that lives the longest is a shark, as far as we know. 400 plus years for the Greenland shark that lives in deep, cold parts of the ocean. And 400 years. It'd be nice to know their secrets. If we don't kill them all, maybe we'll find out. But they're taken to market, like many others.
One of the coolest sharks, I'm just going to rant about sharks for a minute, is a small shark, like this big, a cookie cutter shark. and they are the only known species to attack a submarine.
Oh, the cookie cutter.
Yes,
Cookie
and
cutter.
they get like their teeth in like perfect circles, and they removed bits of rubber from the outside of this submarine. So they're small, but they're the only shark to have attacked a submarine. So let's give the small sharks a little bit of credit.
I hope they don't get a taste for wetsuits.
Yeah. So far, there's only ever been one recorded cookie cutter bite on a human. But that's the story for another time. And I don't want to scare people in the crowd, so.
It's not life-threatening, but it could truly...
It's just an odd bite. Like if you were going to be a shark attack survivor, you want a cooler story than a circular cookie cut, bite in your leg. Anyway, you say something in Mission Blue, and you said it again yesterday, and it always strikes me as amazing because people like myself, I want to have started diving when you did. I want to go back in time. I want to get Doctor Who's TARDIS and go back to when the oceans were full of life, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago. That's when I want to go back to. But you're always saying that if you could be born at any time, it would be now.
Yeah.
And to me, that demonstrates like an immense amount of hope in humans. And I must admit that I can't relate to that amount of hope that you have for people to be making a difference. Why would you want to be born now when we're about to destroy everything?
Well, we still have about 10% of the sharks remaining. Starting in the 1980s, the global market for shark fins and shark meat really scaled up significantly. And since then, the number of sharks that have been extracted, it just makes your head spin, leaving big gaps in the ocean food webs, big gaps in the carbon cycle that does have an impact, ta-da, on climate. Big gaps in the phosphorus, nitrogen, sulfur, all the ingredients that make life prosper gets channeled through the food webs to get to the big sharks. So, yes, I've been a witness, like the sharks, to this time of extraordinary change. And I have to say, there are still some places that are like diving 50 years ago, from the 1950s. Like, I have to say the southern coast of Cuba has been relatively protected and is mostly about as good as it gets in this general part of the world, this part of the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Parts of the Pacific still are as good as it gets. And you can go back half a century ago and find some damage that humans have done. So it's not universal, but for sure, much has been lost. And I think it's because we now know what we now know that we have the power to change the nature of nature. And as a witness, it's not something that I have read in books, although I have read it in books, but having experienced it, like David Attenborough has said, I'm a witness to this time of remarkable change. And he's here to share the view. I'm here to share the view and to tell you, to share with you, look, what you see today, you may go to the Bahamas and think, wow, this is really great. And I want to say, I wish you had been here. And here's the evidence. And oh, by the way, here's some photographs. Jacques Cousteau's photographs of his diving in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, in Cuba, all over the world are like baselines. This is how it should be. This is how it can be. They're not all gone. Some creatures are all gone on my watch. And I think there are no more monk seals in Cuba or anywhere else in the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean as far north as Galveston, Texas. But there used to be seals lounging on Miami Beach, Tampa Bay. There are islands in the Caribbean, around the Virgin Islands. They're known as the Seal Islands. I mean, who knows today that seals existed in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Caribbean? I know, I never got to see one, but they were around until 1952. Now they're all gone. There are a lot of other creatures, including sharks, like the oceanic whitetip and the short-finned mako. Their numbers are down to less than 1%. So, should still be on the menu? Should any shark be on the menu, given how here's where the numbers were, and here's where the numbers are in my lifetime? That's something that curiously gives me hope, because they're not all gone. And because of what's been learned, aside from the loss that I've witnessed, nobody in the 1950s knew what Earth looked like from space. It wasn't until 1968 that Bill Anders, the astronaut, he's also a nuclear physicist, but the astronaut who had to convince the powers that be that he could take a long lens with him when he went on board Apollo 8, and was able to take that iconic photograph of Earthrise. But I've had the privilege of meeting with Bill Anders, just recently. And he said, everybody loves that Earthrise photograph, and I love it too, but the one I love most is that one of the blue face of the planet, where you look right into the Pacific Ocean, and all you see are little specks around the edge, a few little islands, but you see that the world is blue. And he said that, the world is blue. And now we know this. I don't think it was in the everyday conversations any time before that image just shocked the world, Earthrise and the other images of Earth from afar, that you could hold our whole planet like this and see how things connect. So I was born before that. You have come along knowing what Earth looks like from space. You know what even the smartest people who ever lived prior to the middle of the 20th century, because you're growing up just this avalanche of new information that is now communicated instantly. Around the world, you can pick up this thing you carry in your pocket called a cell phone, your smartphone, and make me seem really dumb, these smartphones. But they do. It's like carrying a library in your pocket. And more than that, you can connect. It's a worry that there are now nearly 8 billion people on the planet. In the middle of the 20th century, there are about, fewer than 3, more than 2, somewhere in the middle there. So that has presented problems, and it's one of the reasons that many people are saying you should be born whenever, when there are fewer people and nature was really much more evident, abundant. But if in ignorance, we really destroyed much of that which we need to stay alive. But now we know. It's that superpower of knowing, not just in a few minds. Now that is being shared across the globe with people, not just nerdy scientists, but people everywhere are able to tap in to that awareness. And it really takes not just the fact that the knowledge is there, but that people feel it, know it. It becomes a part of them. Like the numbers in alphabet, you realize we're in trouble. Imagine if we did not know that we're in trouble because the planet is in trouble. And we went right along doing all the terrible things that have devastated forests, that have brought bluefin tuna down to almost the same as mako and oceanic white-tip sharks, a few more, less than 3% bluefin tuna remaining in the Pacific, a few more in the Atlantic, but you can't say that they're anything like abundant enough to really warrant going out and, taking them for a snack. Maybe once upon a time, maybe never. Like sharks, their role in the ocean systems so important. We can't afford to lose them, even if they do taste good.
So I have to stop looking at it like really sad that there's only 10% left.
You've got the
Instead,
best
be like,
chance.
yes, there's 10% left.
Right.
You should just become a life coach for depressed activists because we need you. We really do. If it's okay, I'm just going to call you up every now and then and be like, oh, everything's screwed. And you're going to be like, no, there's 1% of these sharks left. Go get them.
And not like the monk seal. No hope for those poor animals, or for those of us who wish we could have them back. But there is hope.
We're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the information. And now ignorance is no longer an excuse.
Well, and we also know that when you stop the killing and start the caring, there is a chance. No guarantee, but there's a slow. Remember how California condors got down to just such a small number? People did something about it. Now they're not back to where they were 500 years ago, but there are more today than there were 50 years ago. And that's true with turtles, sea turtles anyway. It's true with whales. That if we could do it with sharks, if we could just stop killing them. If we just stop killing tuna, give them a break, for heaven's sakes.
Nature comes back as soon as we leave it alone.
Which means health to the ocean. The chemistry of the ocean is reliant on the food webs, on life in the ocean. This is not just about rocks and water. This is about the living systems. And sharks are so important to the integrity of these systems. And, we're feeling, seeing, experiencing the difference. And I don't mean just as a scientist, an explorer, a diver, going to places where you used to have, you see sharks, like traffic in downtown New York. You saw, now you say, oh, there's a shark. Whoa, a shark. That used to be warned to look out for sharks. And if you see sharks, be afraid. Now I'm afraid when I don't see sharks. And that's the reality. We'd have to think about what is it going to take to restore them. And we know that it does work when the places that have been protected. And going back to when President Bush signed into law as a national protected area, a monument, just before he left office, it was the biggest protected area, land or sea, on the planet. George W. Bush, for heaven's sakes. And then he did it at a time when a fraction of 1% of the ocean was protected. He really scaled up the expectation of what could be done in terms of embracing a large part of the ocean, just as some of the actions taken early in the 20th century scaled up areas that are now national parks and national monuments. Imagine if that hadn't happened in the early part of the 20th century, if you had to start from scratch today to find those places that were still in pretty good shape and protect them or restore them. We're so fortunate that our predecessors took the action they did. And now we are the predecessors of those who are coming along. How are they going to think about us if we just let the ocean continue to decline without doing what we can on our watch early in the 21st century? The chance is right here, right now, to make that happen. We need to do it more for the land. Only about 14% of the land is safeguarded proactively. Right now, about 3% of the ocean, which is quite a lot in a relatively short period of time from when Bush declared the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Monument. But we're a long way from the 30% by 2030 in this decade. It's possible, but it takes people making it possible. I mean, if the fish were voting, if the sharks were in charge, I think it would have been more than 30% a long time ago. You say, what do you humans think that you own the ocean? Come on. We've been in charge here for 300 million years, and you've arrived, on the planet. You're real newcomers, and you don't get it. Maybe we will. Maybe this is the time.
Well, they've survived 5 major extinctions, and they're not surviving humans. And that should make us feel pretty crappy, in my opinion. We're pretty scary. And I remember the first time I actually noticed a decline of sharks in the ocean. I was 14 years old. I started diving on the Great Barrier Reef when I was about 12 years old. And I used to go on night dives where there'd be so many reef sharks. And I was a bit of a weird kid, so I just wanted to get close to the sharks. So I used to breathe really quickly underwater and make my heartbeat go faster. And they'd pick up on it and they'd come in and buzz you and stuff. Everyone thought I was weird, but it was so much fun. And that first early interaction with sharks is what made me fall in love with that area. And then only a couple years later, I was going back to the exact same places and seeing one shark. And it was this huge shock. And I get people all the time assuming that we want to be involved in conservation when in reality, I'd love it if I didn't have to speak to anyone and I could just go dive with sharks.
Yeah.
But this is a necessity now. We don't have a choice to see a decline at such a young age. And a lot of youth involved in conservation these days, they get told, oh, what do you know? You're so young. But it's the fact that we are so young and we are witnessing a decline that gives our arguments more validity than anyone's.
Well, and the fact that you have grown up knowing what no one not only did know, but what they could not know, what is now known and that is now available to know, not just to academics, not just to CEOs or heads of state, or, it's accessible. Knowledge is there, and you know how to get to it. So, I mean, we need to listen up to the kids who just have it in their thinking in ways that those who were not exposed to the knowledge of the issues that now really are headlines of our time. Yeah, it's now or never. And I'm not alone in saying this decade is make or break on many fronts. I mean, there probably will be humans for some indefinite period of time, even if we continue down the same track that has brought us to the level of prosperity that we now have, and that is by regarding nature as free goods. We call them natural resources, and we don't pay the real costs. Fish are free. A live fish, what's the accounting base for a live fish swimming in the ocean? 0. When does it have a price tag on it? When you've caught it, killed it, and taken it to market. What about all those other animals that are killed in the process of taking the fish that ultimately have a price when they go to market and are sold, wholesale and then retail and then restaurants or grocery stores where they get, the price goes up at each step of the way, but you never pay the real cost because the ocean is missing pieces of the big supply out there in the ocean. It's like a grocery store where you don't have to pay when you check out. And that is somehow lulled us into thinking that all we have to do is scale up our fishing and there'll always be fish. Now, because you've seen the decline of sharks, you probably have seen the decline of grouper.
Yeah.
You've seen the decline.
And then the reef dies.
Whatever.
It all happens like in a pattern, like a devastating pattern. And people are always shocked when I tell them only 33% of the Great Barrier Reef is actually protected. And those areas aren't enough to protect the home ranges of where sharks travel. And there are illegal shark fisheries operating inside the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, amongst other things. So we have this illusion that certain areas are protected when in reality they aren't. And I think often people kind of operate under a false sense of security. I certainly did. I was like, the Great Barrier Reef is never going to be sustainable.
It's called a park.
Yep.
Isn't it safe
Yep.
for life? I think originally when the park was established in 1975, maybe 3% was safeguarded for the fish, the lobsters, but everything else was open for various forms of fishing, including trawling, which means you throw out this big net and scrape the ocean floor. It's like catching songbirds with a bulldozer. You know, you destroy the forest, you shake out a few birds. Shrimp trawling, or whatever it is, bottom trawling, for creatures like halibut and flounder, the ones who stay near the bottom, scallops. You scrape the whole area and you shake out the few things that you want to consume, or rather, most of the fishing today is not for consumption by the fishermen, the families, and their communities. It's become a big business, and it's subsidized by billions of dollars across the globe. And it's really a very poor business model when you think about it, that fish aren't free, first of all. We don't account for the real cost. And then you subsidize on top of that with fuel subsidies and low interest or no interest loans for boats. And then there are whole fisheries agencies. And I know Australia has a big one, a big part of the government. When I served as the chief scientist of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in this country in the early 90s, 1990, the National Marine Sanctuary Program, which is a bit like national parks, but not quite, but sort of the counterpart in the ocean. The budget started out at $3 million. By the time I left, it was moving up to something really noticeable, $50 million for protecting all of the waters in the US waters. The Fisheries Agency, how about $1 billion? You know, a little bit to protect what's out there, a whole lot to go out and find, capture, and market ocean wildlife. And it's no wonder. And the United States is not alone. I mean, Australia, similarly, you know, for protection, it just hasn't seemed like we need to do it. The ocean will take care of itself. Except now we know.
Well, I can't say anything bad about the United States fisheries right now because I'm still waiting on a visa. But I'll talk bad about the Australian ones any day of the week. And
Well, the Australians began this, well, New Zealand and Australia together, to access deep sea fish, orange roughy.
yes, and that hurt a lot of sharks.
Nobody consumed orange roughy when I was a kid because it didn't even know they existed.
And how long do they live? They live up to like 70 years old?
I think that they start to reproduce in their 20s.
In their 20s.
And because they age the fish by looking at their ear bones, it's not quite like looking at the rings on a tree, but it's comparable in some ways. And there are also chemical means of dating how old a big orange roughy would be. That would be a big one because they're relatively small. But 150 years, maybe 2 centuries for orange roughy. And they're taken when they're gathering together in large numbers. And they do this every year, just occasionally they get together and they hoop it up to make more orange roughy. And that's when the fishermen catch them using trawls. And in the process, I've seen the images. I haven't been there personally, but I've seen the images, these ancient deep sea corals, they're stony corals, big trees that have been around for 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. that are just ripped out of the ocean because it's where the orange roughy find a home for their, mating dance and all that. And so what do you do with those ancient corals? You just throw them over the side. They're considered bycatch, they're considered trash, they consider a nuisance because they tear up the nets.
I think a huge part of what happens in the ocean, the issue is what's out of sight is out of mind. And bringing awareness to it has been a huge part of the fight. But now we have that information, we have the numbers, we have a lot of awareness. But why is it something that everybody in this room, whether they live in landlocked states or they live on the ocean, whether they go in the ocean, they're terrified of sharks, or they're in there every day, it's something that affects everyone. It's something that everyone has to pay attention to. Why does our fight for the ocean relate to every single person in this room and not just us? And why do we need every single person in this room?
Why do we
need them? We need their help.
When I think it was in my very first visit to Australia, a reporter interviewed me and asked, why do we need the ocean? I mean, it sort of took me back. But I thought about the question, okay, so what good is the ocean if you, as the reporter said, I don't swim, I don't eat fish, I get seasick, people don't drink salt water, so if the ocean dried up tomorrow, what difference would it make? I mean, think about that. No ocean at all. Well, if you take away the ocean, it's 97% of Earth's water. All life needs water. You take away 97% of the biosphere where life on Earth actually lives. You take away the basis of climate. No ocean. The mechanism for capturing carbon dioxide, for creating the temperature differential that the ocean does, distributing temperature throughout the planet through currents, cold currents, warm currents, and mostly it's home for life. And, oh, by the way, if you took away the ocean, the rest of life on Earth could not survive either. So it's just pretty straightforward. The ocean shapes climate, chemistry, and is the place where life prospers for the most part, for sure on this planet, maybe in the universe. I don't know. I don't think there are any tuna fish on Jupiter, Mars, no elephants.
There is really interesting research coming out right now from Southern California, where they've been noticing that the movements of great white sharks that they're tagging are changing. They are going places they never did before. They are hanging out longer in certain places. And it kind of suggests that our relationships with animals like sharks is going to change. So there are all these little parts to climate change that we don't often think about. But one thing I've been thinking about is the way we interact with sharks is going to change, and that could potentially be dangerous for people. And I do believe that pretty soon it's going to be everybody's problem, including the people that just enjoy the coastline. All those little kinds of changes. Are we starting to see them? Are we going to see them? Can we predict them in any way, or is this going to be new territory for us? Is this something that worries you? Is this something we all need to be worried about?
Well, the ocean, for temperature, the composition of, the chemistry, the presence of noxious things that we put into the ocean, including plastics that did not exist when I first began diving. I mean, they did, but not in the ocean, nothing like what you see today. And the acidification of the ocean, more acid environment, which is not just bad news for coral reefs and oysters and other things with an obvious calcium carbonate shell, starts at the very bottom of the food chain, altering the nature and composition of the phytoplankton that captures the carbon dioxide, generates food, and ultimately generates sharks, and makes our existence possible, among other things. But, from a time when I was advised as a young scientist and would-be diver, really, one of the things you have to worry about most is encounters with sharks. And I took it seriously at first, and then I realized they're worried about man-eaters, and you don't qualify, and neither do I. Maybe half the population has to worry about man-eating sharks, but
I
so I
find it hard to believe you've never been called a man-eater.
I did stop worrying. Not because, they don't have a taste for anything but guys, but it was, we're not on their menu. We've never been on their menu, and we're not on their menu now. They get curious sometimes, or sometimes they feel threatened. And some of the sharks are very territorial, like the gray reef sharks. They give you fair warning. You put their fins down and do this little dance, and hey, that's his reef or her reef. And if you listen to what they're saying with their body language, you just let them be. Wouldn't you do that with a tiger? You should do it with a tiger shark too. Respect them. I'm not worried about encounters underwater with people and sharks. The things I worry about is the continuing attitude that people have about them. I think mostly sharks are indifferent to us. I mean, we're just something else in the ocean, but it doesn't immediately spell food. Unless you're carrying a dead fish on your belt. If you've been out spearing fish, then, gosh, you've rung the dinner bell. Kind of your fault if you bring them in. And that's been one of the biggest concerns when people do get occasionally bitten. But here's the other thing. Rarely do sharks swallow what they bite from a human. I don't think we taste good. I'm going to count on that. But no, seriously, they bite and back off, usually.
Like, we want to worry sometimes about how we're going to be affected by that change. But for me, I also think, okay, now that sharks are going new places, they're going to interact with fishing industries that they never interacted with before. They're going to go into areas where they're not protected. It's actually more dangerous for them. And that's something I think about as well.
Until we get to the point where we do for sharks what we've done for whales. I mean, it took humankind a very long time to think of whales as something other than pounds of meat and barrels of oil, sharks as money. We now see, because of what's been learned largely since the middle of the 20th century, more whales were taken in the 20th century because of the technology and the means to get around to places where whales live, and to make it profitable to take them. And whaling also has been, in the 20th century at least, subsidized, but it's because people like yours truly, began looking at whales with new understanding. To see them, now we know that they have families, they have communities, they have language. You get to know individuals and realize that everyone is an individual. And I don't know whether it's universal, but we know for sure with orcas and with dolphins, with belugas, these are all toothed whales in two big families of whales, those with baleen and those with teeth. The toothed whales and dolphins really do have names that they learn when they're first born, and they keep it throughout their life. And when two dolphins meet, we now know, they give their signature whistle, like, "Hi, I'm here. My name is whatever." And there's a social structure that is coherent through at least many decades. We've only been watching them for many decades. Maybe it goes through thousands of years. We don't really know everything, but we know enough to know that we should really think differently about them, and think not just what they are, but who they are. And having lived underwater, getting to know individual fish, I feel the same way about moray eels and barracuda and grouper. The first time it was transformative for me was 1970. I had 2 full weeks to stay in one place, day and night, swimming outside whenever we wanted. There were 6 of us, and 5 of us. Sorry, later there were 6, but in this first time, 4 scientists and 1 engineer. And we just, I mean, you get to, like Mr. Rogers, your neighborhood. You get to know your neighborhood. You get to know your neighbors, who they are. And it makes a difference somehow when you see that same group of parrotfish, the same group of angelfish that stay together. At nighttime, they tuck in, they go to sleep. In the morning, they wake up, they find each other, and they go tooling around the reef as a little group. They're buddies. There's some, like the little butterfly fish, that not only team up once in a while, but they tend to mate for life, like some people. And they live a long time. I mean, people tend to think of fish, if they think of them at all, like chicken. In fact, my beloved National Geographic, I've been explorer in residence, the National Geographic, since 1998. They had an article not so long ago about food, and they had categories. There was beef, there was chicken, and there was fish. Okay, we know what a cow is. We know what a chicken is. There are lots of variations on chicken, but they're basically of the same species. There are 33,000 kinds of fish. So what kind of fish are you eating when you get catch of the day, or fish chowder, or fish and chips, or fish sticks? It's breaded somebody, but who? How old is it? Where did it come from? What's it been eating? What has it? Tell me your story, fish stick. At least give me a name. But we just gloss over the nature of the wild animals in the sea and lump them together. I mean, you might as well say meat. But we don't even think of fish as meat. I'm a vegetarian, I just eat fish. I can hear the fish saying, wait a minute. What about me is not meat?
So my last question for you, because I know that you had a complicated relationship with Noah when you were there, and I won't ask you to dive too much into that, but it brings an interesting point to mind for me, and that is, are we capable of sitting back and relaxing and allowing these large organizations, government or not, to take care of the oceans? Or is it our job? Is it something that we need to worry about, or can we relax?
We have choice, and we have knowledge, and we have time. Not a lot, but if the knowledge is really taken in, not just in your head, but in your heart, if you know, if you feel it, if you see that this matters. And I might be the luckiest people ever to have lived because of the power to be able to safeguard Earth, our life support system. And how do you do that? You protect nature, land and sea. You restore what you can, starting with your backyard maybe, where you have maybe some nice ornamental flowers and things, but not very friendly to the birds and bees and other natural creatures. You can start with a shovel, dig up the grass, plant something that is native to the area where you live, and just feel the joy of giving back to nature. Nature's given us everything. It's time for us to, return the favor. And you can say, how can I do that for the ocean? Well, you can do it with what you eat. You can do it with how you vote. You can support protective measures. Even in the coastal areas, salt marshes have really declined. About half have disappeared. Why? Because we love our coasts. We've transformed. In warm areas, again, I keep saying it's about half, it's about half, it's about half, but it's true. About half of the mangroves gone because they're in coastal areas where people want to build things, whether it's a marina or a parking lot or a condo. It's that attractive shoreline and shallow water that we know engineering, we know how to do this. We can take the sea floor, upend it, make dry land where there was a marsh or even shallow water, coral reefs. That's part of what's happened to coral reefs. They've been turned into parking lots or whatever, or destroyed in the process of making channels to accommodate marinas. I mean, because we can do these things doesn't mean that we should, now that we know and think about the real cost. It doesn't, of course we need access to the sea, but being mindful now of what we know and the cost and the trade-offs, the seagrass meadows, cold water seagrasses all through, there are about 65 or 70 variations on the theme of seagrasses. They're flowering plants, not like the kelp and other seaweeds. These are flowering plants that have started their history on the land, but they move back into the ocean, and they're really making a difference over wide coastal areas, generating oxygen. I mean, the amount per square, whatever it is, meter, foot, mile, kilometer, the ability to capture and hold carbon while generating oxygen exceeds what most rainforests. We really should and do respect rainforests, but we've got to understand that seagrass meadows, marshes, mangroves do a lot of the heavy lifting, but most of all is the tiny forests in the sea, the plankton, the phytoplankton, generate more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere. They do much of the heavy lifting in terms of capturing carbon. And knowing that there's been a decline from the 1950s, that magic Anthropocene era that we now all share, a decline, and the numbers are squishy. Is it 30%? Is it 40%? Or is it as much as 60%? I mean, we don't have a definitive answer. I mean, nobody. We have evidence here and there, but not enough to be able to say for sure, except that it has declined. And it's continuing. Ocean acidification, the plasticization of the ocean, all those little things that we put into the changes in and what we're taking out of the ocean, modifying the chemistry. But we know this now. What can we do? That should be the headline. What can we do right now? We've got plenty of evidence that the ocean is in trouble. Therefore, not only are we in trouble, but we're setting in motion a bad recipe for humankind going forward. Wouldn't it be great to change the trajectory so that you can be a part of this, not tipping point, but turning point? Here we are. We've got the best chance we'll ever have to safeguard the earth. It's going to get harder. That is for sure. I wish we could go back 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, armed with what we now know. Imagine if we could start with North America as it was in 1800 and just be more careful about where we put our roads and what we put into the atmosphere. And instead of damming every river that we come across, to realize there's a cost to channeling water where water doesn't really want to go. And I mean, it's exciting to see many of the dams, not nearly enough. It's like a race. Can those being built equal those that are being torn out? I mean, there's really a move to get rid of dams that are no longer serving a purpose, and in some cases are absolutely, contrary. They're causing damage. We can give back. Once you say, oh, we know what to do, let's just get about the business of doing it. And don't repeat some of the same stupid mistakes that we've made, even though it's, now we know. I mean,
We have 10% left.
that's power.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I could ask you questions for days, to be honest, but we are out of time. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with me, with everybody, and for the life you've lived for the oceans.
I'd like to ask a question of you.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So what do you see ahead in the next 10 years? You, personally. What makes your heart beat fast?
Honestly, it used to be being in the water with sharks, and as things evolve, it's now changing the way people see them and documenting the bad things happening to them. Because I used to think that people just didn't care, but then I realized slowly that people just didn't know. And once they know, once they see what's happening, then it awakens this power in people to want to do something about it. So that's the only kind of little bit of hopefulness that I have left. So I see activism becoming normalized. I see environmentalism being taught in schools, being a part of everybody's upbringing and everybody's life, because it is not only an option, but a necessity. And that's what I think we're heading to. And as much as I don't want to have children that have to be familiar with activism, I think it is what is required of us. And it's the only way that we're going to make a difference. So hopefully the next 10 years just creates more people like us, like everybody here, everybody that wants to hear about this, and people that know that there is no correct way to help to be an environmentalist, but just using the way that you like, that makes your heart beat fast, that you're good at, and using it to help the ocean, even if you're an accountant.
Is that your advice for everybody here?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to be specific? Give them some advice?
Oh gosh, me?
Yes, you.
You be giving the advice? Okay. My advice is, I definitely didn't think that one person could make a difference when I started doing what I do. I definitely did not believe that. But I was going to try anyway because I'm stubborn. But now I realize that only one person can make a difference. That's just how it works. And you do that by getting other people on board. You do that by having a unique level of passion for your cause. And that's how change happens. And I think that everything that I do and that you do, it is to inspire people, like everybody in this room, to do something themselves and to help us in this fight for the oceans. Whether you live away from it or near it, you can have such an impact. And we really do need to. So, yeah.
Bravo. I have one thing that we haven't touched on, but it's recognition that most of life on Earth does not live where the sun shines. It lives in the dark. And if I could, and I hope I get a chance to take you in a little submarine with your life support system. Like astronauts go high in the sky, they learn about their life support system. Going deep in the ocean, you really care about what keeps you alive when you're in an environment where it's not very friendly if you step outside your little one atmosphere bubble. But it's such a gift to be in a little clear sphere. And especially when you start out when the sun is bright and you descend through these shades of blue that don't have names. You just run out of names. You can think of all the names you think of for blue, and there just aren't enough to describe the brilliant light down to the dark purple blue, and then it's black. And it happens within certainly about 1,000 feet, but by 1,000 meters, light, except for bioluminescence, is gone. Bioluminescence, the firefly kind of light that 90% of creatures in the deep sea have some form of that flash, sparkle, and glow that dominates communication in the deep sea. Why is this not taught in the first grade or sooner about where life on Earth actually prospers the most? Why don't people learn about the magic of squid when you're 3 years old? I know of some 3-year-olds that do, because a couple of people right here who've been doing this for their munchkins since day one. It should be integral to our understanding the planet that is our home, that is mostly blue, and yet it's not blue, it's mostly dark, but illuminated with this galaxy of creatures that make their own light. And we ought to be respectful of that, because the deep sea, life on Earth, keeps us alive. And when I was a kid, I read a book by William Beebe. It wasn't a film. I never met the man, but I read his story about getting together with an engineer, Otis Barton. Together, they dreamed up building a submarine. No one had done it before. They were the very first. I mean, not a military submarine designed to go out and kill things. This was meant to be a submarine to take these two guys 1,000 meters, half a mile beneath the surface in the 1920s and early 1930s. They were the first witnesses of this extraordinary fabric of life, that living soup that keeps us alive. And it really got to me. And I hope maybe it'll get to you, too. I'm pretty sure it's going to get to you. I'm going to see to it that it does. But we all need to have access to the sea. It's like the early days of aviation in the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century. Millions of people go high in the sky. Do you know how many people have been to the deepest part of the ocean? Until 1960, nobody. Then 2 people went. And fast forward to 2012, 52 years later, James Cameron, who's really a filmmaker, but he's also an explorer. He's an ocean guy. What's with that? See, you can be anything, right? You don't have to be just one thing. You can do lots of different things because you're a human being. You're not locked in. So he was the second. He went down all by himself. So that made it 3. And then starting in 2019, another guy. He's a businessman. He's an investor. He's not somebody you'd think of as, he's a suit and tie kind of guy. But he had a dream. He liked climbing mountains, so he climbed all the big ones. And then decided he wanted to go in the other direction. So starting in 2019, after having commissioned the construction of a little submarine that can take 2 people, he decided he'd go all by himself the first time, and has gone to all the deepest places now. Every ocean basin has a place that's deeper than any other place, including the deepest, the Mariana Trench, off the coast of the Philippines. And then he began inviting others to go with him, including Kathy Sullivan, who's a skywalking astronaut. So she's the deepest and highest, the most vertical woman, having gone deeper than any other woman, and as high as any have gone in the sky. And then he did something really cool in taking the son of Don Walsh, who was one of the 2 who went down first in 1960. He took his son down to where his dad had been so many decades before. And so presently, 12 people have been to the moon. 13 people have been to the deepest part of the ocean. But it's only 13. It's only 7 miles away. Airplanes fly that high in the sky. You ski, some of you, 7 miles in a day. Certainly a lot of people can walk that far. Why is it so hard? If you know why it matters, you might be motivated to figure out how to get there, to raise the resources. The technology exists. Many variations on the theme of little subs could gain access, not just to 1,000 meters where BB went, where I've had a chance to go. I've used more than 30 different kinds of little subs. But we need for everybody here to go see. Because as you said, when you know, you might care. And it's experiences that really reinforce that knowing. It may be good enough to read a story. It may be good enough to see the pictures, the images that we can concoct. But getting there and experiencing it just closes the deal. All right, I'm in. I hope you're all in too.
I think we're going to open it up for questions, I guess. Nope, we don't have time. Okay.
If I could pose just a brief question. I know we're right at time. One of the things that comes to mind as I think about the concept of redefining environmentalism is how many youth and communities across America, and I represent several communities in San Diego, as well as communities across the country, that wouldn't necessarily connect themselves to that definition. Take, for example, Southeast San Diego, where my organization works to connect youth to transformative experiences in the outdoors. It's 15 minutes away from the coast, and 90% of our youth have never even had the opportunity to get to the ocean, much less to take a submarine to its depths. And I bring that to light because as I think about America and the changing demographics of our country, by 2040, communities of color will represent collectively the majority in our country. What does that mean to the environmentalist movement? That communities that are so grossly disconnected from nature, and a matter of fact, much of the burden of environmental injustices are borne by those communities. What does it mean to engage those communities to think about how we diversify environmentalism, to make sure that we have the scientists, the researchers, the elected officials, the constituency that will, the future philanthropists that will continue to champion causes for the environment for the next 100 years.
You want to repeat the question for everybody?
We have like a little saying in Australia, and it's NIMBY. My mum taught it me when I was very young, that saying, and it means not in my backyard. And it was about starting with small local issues.
But can you repeat his?
I don't think I can.
I mean, I don't think everybody heard the question.
Essentially, like, how do people become environmentalists when they're so close yet so far from where they are, and how do we diversify it?
In particular, communities of color.
In particular, communities of color. And I think that those local issues, of which there are everywhere, are like a super important way to start. And one thing I will say is that there's no clear path for anyone in environmentalism. Like, this is one thing that I notice, like, these days is there's no university course for, hey, you want to be an environmentalist? Come study this. Nobody laid out a clear path for myself, for example, to get into activism for sharks. So I don't think that it's anybody's responsibility to, like, create that path. I think as individuals, we've got to find our own. And it's a challenge. It's not something at all that's going to be easy. And I'm sure you can elaborate on that. But that's been one of the hardest things. I mean, even when I was growing up, it wasn't a big thing in Australia. It was fighting for an animal that people hate, people want to see dead, people are scared of. So just creating our own ways to do these things. And you also need a lot of privilege to be a conservationist. A huge part of conservation is privilege. And a lot of people don't realize that. So approaching it with that understanding as well, and not judging people that are like a little further from it, and making it more accessible, I think that's another big part of it.
Yeah, I think we're one step in the right direction by identifying the problem. That's the start of being able to solve the problem. And I think it is an issue. Just project forward 10 years, 20 years. I hope we have that long. And know that we have to invest right now in the kids. And if we don't, nothing else really matters. I mean, really, everything that we care about, we leave to those who will be next in charge, and it won't be long before they will be large and in charge. And we need to convey the urgency, the relevance, the importance to everything, economy, health, security, our very existence, anchored in taking care of nature. We have, throughout our history, consumed nature to foster our prosperity. And now we see we've gone too far. We really have. But it's been accelerating in my lifetime, which is bad news, but it's good news, because you've got witnesses who say, look, here is the problem. We need to do this to be able to give those in the future a planet that's at least as healthy, at least as good, at least as intact as what has been in our time. And if we miss that, whatever it is we care about now is just going to go up in smoke. So I think that's part of why I think we're gathered here. How do we take what we've got and get to a better place? Not just for us, but making sure that it really stabilizes our life support system so that you can breathe, so that water will still magically fall out of the sky in the right places at the right time, so that Earth works in our favor. It's the best chance we'll ever have. I don't know whether anybody here is really planning to go to Mars.
I'd rather go to the bottom of the
Anybody?
ocean, to be honest.
Good luck if you do. Anyway.